She called the police on me for putting my own kayak into the water from land I legally owned. 7 a.m. flat Montana lake. Steam rising off my coffee. Paddle already floating beside me. Then the sound of heels hitting wood. Sharp, fast, angry. A woman stormed down from her mansion, jabbing her finger at me like I had just committed a serious crime. "You are not allowed to use this lake," she yelled. "HOA rules. Community standards." She started snapping photos with a phone, threatening $500 fines for every single day I touched the water. She lectured me about permits and authorization for property I had paid for myself. 3 days later, a certified letter showed up. $15,000 in retroactive fines for accessing water I owned. I had spent nearly $500,000 on that property. What she didn't know was that I'd spent the last 15 years investigating financial crimes for the federal government, and she had absolutely no idea what happens when the wrong person gets pushed too far. Stick with me, because when I finally reached inside my jacket at that packed community meeting, everything flipped upside down. What would you do if your HOA tried to fine you for using your own waterfront? Let me rewind and explain how I ended up here. My name is Marcus Payton, and at 48, I honestly thought I had life figured out. After 2 decades working financial crime cases for the federal government in D.C., I was ready for a quieter chapter. My wife Elena is a school principal, and we'd been talking about slowing down before our twin daughters left for college. That's when we found it. Pine Ridge, Montana. 2 acres of absolute peace with 200 feet of untouched shoreline on the clearest lake you've ever laid eyes on. The asking price was $485,000, which drained most of our savings, but we believed it was worth it. The girls could come visit on breaks, and we could finally enjoy the calm retirement we'd imagined. Pine Ridge Lake has 847 homes scattered around the shoreline. You've got long-time residents in modest cabins passed down for generations. And then you've got the newer crowd, with million-dollar glass palaces clinging to the hillsides. Every morning, mist drifted off the mirror-smooth water while loons called across the lake. The smell of pine needles mixed with smoke from nearby chimneys, making the whole place feel like Christmas morning. It was perfect. Oh, at least, I thought it was. Enter Brenda Hartwell, 52 years old. Platinum blonde bob that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payment. Always dressed in designer activewear, even though the closest thing to exercise she got was walking to her mailbox. She lived in a $1.2 million modern eyesore that looked more Malibu than Montana. And Brenda wasn't just another homeowner. She was the HOA president. She'd stacked a 9-member board with 6 of her closest friends, using what I'd later learn was some very calculated social tactics. So there I was, my very first Saturday as a Pine Ridge resident, launching my kayak from what I believed was my shoreline. The water was flawless, that glassy calm you only get before the wind wakes up. I barely pushed off when I heard gravel crunch beneath expensive hiking boots. "Excuse me." Brenda's voice ripped through the quiet morning like a chainsaw. "Waterfront access requires HOA approval and fee payment." I paddled back to shore, assuming there had to be a misunderstanding. "This is my property line," I said, pointing to the survey stakes. "It runs to the water." She raised a clipboard like it was holy scripture. "Not according to our community covenants. I'll need to see your lake access permit." Lake access permit. For my own land. I couldn't believe it. That's when she started photographing me, warning I'd be fined $500 for every day I used the lake without authorization. $500 a day. I'd seen enough scams in my federal career to smell something rotten, but I stayed calm. "I'll need to review those covenants," I said. "They are public record," she replied with a smug smile. "You should have done your homework before buying." Here's the problem. I had done my homework. I'd read every page of the HOA documents before closing, and nowhere, absolutely nowhere, did it mention lake access permit or fees for waterfront owners. Something was seriously wrong. And after 15 years of following money trails and catching people who thought they were untouchable, my instincts were firing. I just didn't know how deep this rabbit hole went, or that Brenda Hartwell was about to make the worst mistake of her life by targeting someone who knew exactly how to fight back. 3 days later, the certified letter arrived. Elena brought it in from a mailbox with that look wives get when trouble is coming. The return address read Pine Ridge Lake Property Owners Association in fancy lettering that probably cost more than it should have. Inside was a bill that made my coffee go cold. $15,000 in retroactive fines, calculated at $500 per day, going back 3 weeks to our move-in date. Attached were photocopied covenants, board minutes, and property surveys claiming to justify every dollar. "Marcus," Elena said softly, reading over my shoulder. "How is this legal?" That was the question. We had 10 days to pay or face immediate legal action and attorney fees. Friendly people. That's when my federal training kicked in. 20 years of reviewing financial documents teaches you to spot inconsistencies instantly, and these documents were packed with red flags. First one, the covenant amendments were supposedly approved at an emergency meeting on Christmas Eve, 2023. Christmas Eve. What kind of HOA emergency happens then? I called neighbors. Not a single person had received notice of that meeting. Second red flag. Only 4 residents supposedly attended this meeting where property rights for over 800 homeowners were altered. Montana law requires approval from 67% of homeowners for changes like that. 4 out of 800, 4 to 7 doesn't even count. But the real bombshell came next. The amendments were passed 3 days after our purchase closed. 3 days. Either the timing was miraculous, or someone had been tracking home sales and waiting to spring this trap on new owners. I spent the next week doing what I do best, following the paper trail. I filed formal records requests for all HOA financials, which made Brenda about as comfortable as a cat in a bathtub. I also spoke quietly with neighbors. The stories were infuriating. Dorothy Walsh, 73 and one of the original founders, invited me over for coffee. Brenda's family real estate business had handled 6 of the last 8 home sales in Pine Ridge. 6 of 8. And every new buyer had received similar fine notices within their first month. "She's been doing this for 2 years, Dorothy said, handshaking, targeting newcomers who don't know better. Dorothy also showed me the original 1987 covenants. Yellowed pages spread across a kitchen table, smelling like old paper. Those documents specifically protected waterfront access and capped HOA fees at basic maintenance. The pattern was clear. Brenda wasn't just power-hungry. She was running a calculated scam. Fake emergency meetings. Selective enforcement. Intimidation. It was textbook white-collar fraud. And like all con artists, she got greedy. She needed approval from at least 564 homeowners. She had 4 votes. Her rules weren't just unethical. They were illegal. Every fine she issued was based on amendments that never legally existed. In other words, she was collecting money under false pretenses. A federal crime. But I wasn't ready to play that card yet. In my experience, if you give criminals enough rope, they hang themselves. And Brenda Hartwell was about to get plenty of rope. Her next move came straight from the Neighborhood Dictator Handbook. 2 days after my record requests, she posted in the community Facebook group, entitled "Newcomers Threatening Our Property Values." No names mentioned. Everyone knew. Then she escalated. Violation notices started flying. Dorothy was cited for garden gnomes she'd had for 15 years. Jim Patterson was fined for parking his work truck in his own driveway. Mary Gonzalez was warned her fence was 2 inches too tall. Fear spread fast. People stopped speaking up. Then came the special assessment. $2,000 per household for a so-called legal defense fund. No vote. No approval. That's when Elena had a brilliant idea. "Why don't we invite everyone over?" she said. "Wine and paperwork. Make it social." So we did. 2. Elena organized what we half-jokingly called Wine and Paperwork Night. A small gathering where affected homeowners brought their violation notices so we could step back and see the larger pattern. Corks popped. Papers shuffled. Our living room filled with 15 households comparing documents. What emerged was disturbing. Every violation notice had gone to residents who either questioned Brenda's authority or openly supported me. It wasn't random enforcement. It was retaliation, plain and simple. But it was more than that. It was a coordinated campaign of harassment meant to scare people into silence. Then Dorothy revealed something even more revealing. A thick manila folder packed with HOA financial records from the past 3 years. She'd been quietly saving copies because she never trusted Brenda's bookkeeping. Smart move. I spread the documents across our dining room table and did what I've spent most of my life doing, follow the money. What I uncovered made my stomach knot. Brenda's family had somehow avoided paying $47,000 in legitimate HOA assessments over the past 2 years. $47,000. At the same time, she was billing other homeowners for violations that never existed. How is that even legal? Jim Patterson asked, peering over his glasses. That's when I explained the Montana Homeowner Protection Act. The law requires a majority vote for any assessment over $1,200 per household, and it holds board members personally liable for unauthorized collections. What Brenda was doing wasn't just unethical. It was a direct violation of state law that could leave her personally responsible for every illegal dollar she'd taken. But the biggest shock was still coming. Dorothy reached deeper into her folder and pulled out bank statements. The Special Assessment Fund had already collected $8,000 to $9,000 from residents too intimidated to fight back. $8,000 to $9,000 deposited into an account with only one authorized signer, Brenda Hartwell. Under Montana law, HOA funds must be held in multi-signature accounts. Single-signature accounts are only allowed under $5,000 and only with explicit board approval per transaction. What Brenda had done was textbook embezzlement. The room fell silent as I laid it out. You could hear the old wall clock in our kitchen ticking as everyone processed the truth. Finally, Mary Gonzalez spoke. So what do? We document everything, I said, and we get ready. Because here's what I know about financial criminals. They never stop at one crime. They escalate until someone forces them to stop. And I had a feeling Brenda's next move would be bigger, riskier, and more desperate than anything so far. I was right. But even with my background, I wasn't prepared for how far she was willing to go to protect her little empire. Things turned personal fast. The next escalation hit at 6:30 on a Wednesday morning. I was loading my kayak for what had become my daily act of quiet defiance, using my own waterfront, when Deputy Jim Morrison pulled into my driveway, lights flashing. "Marcus Payton," he asked, stepping out with a tired look of someone stuck in the middle. "That's me. I need you to step away from the water. We received a complaint of criminal trespassing." The click of handcuffs echoed across the lake as he did his job. Elena's sharp gasp from the deck sliced through the air. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. Some filmed. Others looked away. And there was Brenda, standing on her deck, arms folded, wearing a smile that radiated satisfaction. She'd done it. She had me arrested for using my own property. The charges were creative. Criminal trespass. Violation of a court order I'd never seen. Disturbing the peace. Deputy Morrison stayed professional. You could tell he hated it. "This is harassment," I told him as he guided me to the accuser. "That's for the court to decide," he said. "I'm just following protocol." What no one knew, except Elena, was that while I was being arrested, I'd spent my evenings calling some very specific people in Washington, D.C. When you spend 15 years investigating financial crimes for the federal government, you make connections. And those connections have access to databases that make Google look primitive. By the time I was released on my own recognizance 4 hours later, I had a dossier on Brenda Hartwell that would have impressed a private investigator. Our HOA president had a history. Similar disputes in 2 previous California communities, both ending with sudden relocations just before major investigations wrapped up. But the real goal was financial. 3 bankruptcies in 12 years, all dismissed due to procedural irregularities. Translation: she was skilled at hiding assets. Even better, a former colleague in the FBI Financial Crimes Unit flagged wire transfers from Pine Ridge-related accounts to a Delaware shell company. Shell companies aren't illegal, but using them to siphon HOA funds? That's when federal prosecutors pay attention. Ironically, the criminal charges against me turned into a gift. A Colorado attorney named Helena Morrison, Deputy Morrison's older sister, took my case pro bono after hearing the story. Helena specialized in property rights law and despised HOA abuse. "Discovery is going to be beautiful," she told me. "If they want to claim authority, fine. We subpoena everything." That's when things exploded. Court-ordered disclosures revealed that the Pine Ridge Lake Property Owners Association was carrying $340,000 in undisclosed debt, hidden liabilities, unpaid legal fees, contracted disputes, insurance lapses stretching back 18 months, and that special assessment slush fund, The $8,000 to $9,000 had been used to pay personal legal bills for Pine Ridge Community Services, LLC, a company owned entirely by Brenda's husband, fake landscaping contracts, security services that never existed, maintenance work that was never done. It was a full-scale looting operation dressed up as community management. The HOA was months from insolvency. Brenda had been covering it up by inventing fees and terrorizing residents into paying. But wire fraud across state lines falls under federal jurisdiction, which meant my 15 years chasing crimes exactly like this was suddenly very relevant. The trap was set. Brenda just didn't know it yet. Helena's legal team moved fast. Subpoenas brought everything: bank statements, contracts, emails, board recordings. What they uncovered was catastrophic fraud wrapped in desperation. The HOA wasn't struggling. It was completely bankrupt. $340,000 underwater. Unpaid lawsuits. Contractors paid for work never done. Lapse insurance that exposed every homeowner to liability. And that shell company, Pine Ridge Community Services, LLC, was the centerpiece of it all. Over 18 months, Brenda had siphoned nearly $200,000 through fake invoices approved by her handpicked board. Legitimate-sounding services. Fake work. Real money. Straight into accounts controlled by her husband. Simple. Effective. Criminal. 3. Meanwhile, legitimate contractors were being strong-armed into paying 30% administrative fees back to the shell company just to keep their contracts at Pine Ridge. Refuse the kickback, and suddenly your work was labeled substandard. Contract got terminated for mysterious quality issues. The scale of the fraud was staggering, but the motive behind it was even more revealing. Brenda was personally drowning. Failed real estate deals in California. $8,000 to $5,000 in credit card debt. Mortgage payments 4 months behind on that pristine lakefront mansion. She was sinking fast and had decided to turn the HOA into her personal flotation device. Her escape plan was already underway. Real estate listings showed her Montana home hitting the market in 2 weeks, priced for a quick sale. She planned to cash out, vanish, and leave 847 families holding the bag for her crimes. But this is where Brenda made her fatal error. Those interstate wire transfers used to hide stolen funds? That's mail fraud and wire fraud under federal jurisdiction. The same federal jurisdiction where I'd spent 15 years putting people just like her behind bars. The evidence was digital, detailed, and devastating. Bank records documenting systematic theft. Email thread discussing how to conceal missing money. Text messages between Brenda and her husband planning the timing of their exit before anyone noticed the disappearing funds. Every transfer, every fake invoice, every shell transaction was preserved in the kind of detail federal prosecutors dream about. This wasn't amateur embezzlement. This was organized, deliberate financial fraud on a scale that could put someone away for decades. And the damage went far beyond paperwork. 200 families were facing potential financial collapse because HOA reserves had been looted. Property values were about to nosedive. Seniors on fixed incomes were being bullied into paying illegal fines to cover massive theft. But Brenda made one massive miscalculation. She assumed she was dealing with ordinary people who'd be too afraid or too broke to fight back. She had no idea she'd just declared war on someone whose entire career was built on hunting people exactly like her. The balance of power shifted overnight. This wasn't about HOA disputes anymore. This was about federal crimes, organized fraud, and evidence so strong it made prosecutors salivate. And I was about to remind Brenda Hartwell that some retirement hobbies are more dangerous than others. Dorothy Walsh's living room became our war room. The walls were lined with faded photos from Pine Ridge's early days. Families building modest cabins. Community cookouts by the lake. Honest memories that made Brenda's crimes feel even more personal. We spread out around Dorothy's kitchen table like generals planning an invasion. Financial documents covered every surface. Laptops hummed. Legal pads filled faster than we could write. Fresh coffee mixed with a musty smell of old paperwork as we organized 15 years of corruption into a case that would make federal prosecutors drool. Helena Morrison brought her entire legal team. 3 attorneys, 2 paralegals, all specialists in financial fraud. My role was to apply federal investigative methods to structure the evidence so it was airtight in court. The beauty of financial crimes, I explained, is that criminals always leave paper trails. Every lie requires 10 more lies to hide it, until the whole structure collapses under its own weight. Elena took charge of organizing the community with a precision that made her such an effective school principal. Within 48 hours, she'd activated a phone tree reaching every household in Pine Ridge. Meetings moved to garages and basements, sharing information without tipping off Brenda's surveillance network. The response was overwhelming. People who'd been silent for years found strength in numbers. Stories poured out. Harassment, illegal fines, intimidation tactics. Mary Gonzalez had been threatened with foreclosure for questioning an assessment. Jim Patterson had been cited for violations that didn't exist anywhere in the rules. Then came the most shocking discovery of all, Dorothy's basement. For 30 years, she'd kept backup copies of HOA records, meeting minutes, financials, correspondence, everything Brenda believed she'd buried or destroyed. "I never trusted her," Dorothy said, handing me box after box of manila folders. "My late husband always said keep copies when power's involved." Those documents were pure gold. They laid out a clear timeline, from Brenda's election as HOA president to the systematic removal of honest board members and the installation of her loyalists. More importantly, they showed the exact moment legitimate governance ended and criminal enterprise began. My contacts in the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit were more than happy to review the books. When federal agents volunteer to analyze documents, you know the case is serious. They confirmed our suspicions. This was classic embezzlement with conspiracy elements that could trigger RICO charges. The legal strategy was elegant. Simultaneous actions in county, state, and federal courts. Civil suits for fraud and embezzlement. Criminal referrals. Emergency injunctions to freeze all HOA and shell company assets before Brenda could disappear. But what hit me hardest was the human impact. Elena and Dorothy documented everything. CNAs choosing between medication and illegal fines. Young families sinking into debt to pay fabricated violations. Financial fraud isn't just numbers. It's real people suffering so criminals can live beyond their means. Within 3 days, the Community Legal Fund raised $23,000. Families barely covering their mortgages donated whatever they could. Preparation felt like a military operation. Evidence catalogued. Witness statements recorded. Transactions traced. Deputy Jim Morrison surprised everyone by quietly offering help once he learned the truth. Something about that arrest didn't sit right, he admitted. HOA disputes don't usually involve handcuffs unless there's more going on. Even the local newspaper editor, Jennifer Santos, committed to full investigative coverage. "This is award-level reporting," she said, "and it protects communities." But the most revealing part was watching Brenda unravel. She hired a private investigator to follow meeting attendees, tried bribing contractors for information, attempted to have Dorothy's property condemned. Every move created new evidence of obstruction and witness intimidation. She was committing federal crimes in real time. Things escalated when my kayak showed up shredded one Tuesday morning. Air hissing. Yellow foam scattered across the dock. Security cameras mysteriously failed that night. Anonymous legal-sized envelopes began appearing in mailboxes. No return address. Threats of massive lawsuits against anyone supporting what they called frivolous accusations. The paper smelled like expensive perfume. Brenda's signature scent. Soon rumors spread about my federal career. Claims I'd been forced out for misconduct. Whispers that Elena and I were broke and trying to extort the HOA. Lies moved fast in small towns. Economic pressure followed. Calls to real estate agents suggesting Pine Ridge was unstable. The message was clear. Side with her or watch your home value collapse. Then came hired muscle. Private security guards from Denver. Expensive suits. Aggressive attitudes. Elderly residents were terrified to leave their homes. Dorothy became their favorite target. Traitors spray painted across her garage in red letters visible from the lake. But Brenda crossed a federal line when legal mail started disappearing. Discovery requests vanished. Witness statements went missing. Mail theft is a federal crime, and each missing envelope was another nail in her coffin. Utility sabotage followed. Power outages targeting dissidents. Water shutoffs hitting Dorothy's house 3 times in 1 week. The utility company confirmed it wasn't accidental. Meanwhile, Brenda hired one of Denver's most expensive law firms. $800 an hour for associates. $1,500 for partners. Their plan was delay, overwhelm, outspend. But what she didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this exact escalation. Remember those federal contacts? They'd been running a parallel investigation for 3 weeks. Financial crimes doesn't play around with wire and mail fraud. They'd already traced a shell company money through 4 banks and 2 cryptocurrency exchanges. Every threatening message, every incident of sabotage, every attempt to scare witnesses was being logged and preserved by professionals who specialize in building A-type federal cases. Discrete cameras were tracking the private security patrols. Mail audits were flagging every missing or altered document. Financial oversight was monitoring each move Brenda made to shuffle or hide assets. The most satisfying part was watching her legal team slowly realize exactly what mess they'd stepped into. Expensive attorneys don't enjoy federal scrutiny, especially when their clients have been committing crimes systematically while claiming to act under legal guidance. By Thursday of that week, Morrison, Peterson, and associates demanded an emergency strategy meeting with their client. By Friday, they had officially withdrawn from representation, citing irreconcilable differences in legal direction. Translated plainly, they'd figured out Brenda was guilty beyond doubt and wanted no part in becoming accessories after fact. But Brenda's worst mistake came next. She crossed a federal red line by threatening a protected witness. When she confronted Dorothy outside the grocery store and warned her that elderly women who meddle sometimes meet unfortunate accidents, she activated automatic federal protection measures. Witness intimidation during a federal investigation isn't just another charge. It's an express lane to pretrial detention. The kind of error that turned comfortable white-collar offenders into high-risk defendants who spend their trial days in federal holding cells instead of sleeping at home. Elena found me in my office late that Friday night, surrounded by evidence crates and legal briefs, assembling the final components of what had escalated into a full-scale federal racketeering case. "How much longer?" she asked. "Soon," I said. "Very soon." Because federal investigations move slowly until they don't. And when they finally accelerate, they hit with the kind of force that transforms relaxed suburban criminals into terrified defendants. Brenda Hartwell was about to learn that lesson firsthand. Her last-ditch maneuver arrived as an emergency HOA meeting notice delivered precisely at 5 p.m. on a Friday. 72 hours to dissolve the Pine Ridge Lake Property Owners Association, liquidate all shared assets, and distribute the proceeds to cover what she claimed were overwhelming legal debts that carry the decision before anyone could organize resistance. Her legal argument was bold to the point of arrogance. She insisted the community face immediate bankruptcy due to frivolous lawsuits and aggressive federal interference. According to her motion, the only solution was immediate liquidation of all common land, recreational facilities, and community infrastructure. Naturally, she already had a buyer lined up, a Delaware-registered shell corporation that traced back to her husband's business associates. They would acquire over 200 acres of premium lakefront property for a fraction of its value, then convert it into luxury condos while longtime residents lost everything they'd spent 3 decades building. The timing was deliberate. A weekend emergency vote meant residents wouldn't have time to consult attorneys or coordinate opposition. A holiday weekend ensured distractions, while Brenda's hand-selected board members could force the vote through before the implications became clear. But she made a fatal error in judgment. She assumed she was dealing with scattered, panicked homeowners who could be rushed into disastrous decisions. She had no idea federal investigators were already monitoring her communications and anticipating exactly this kind of desperate move. Helena Morrison filed emergency injunctions in federal court before Brenda's dissolution notice had even fully circulated. Asset freezes, restraining orders, and preliminary federal jurisdiction rulings brought the process to a complete halt. You cannot liquidate community property when it's classified as evidence in an ongoing federal criminal investigation. The media fallout was explosive. Jennifer Santos ran her expose on the front page of the county newspaper under the headline, "Federal Investigation Uncovers Massive HOA Fraud." Regional television stations picked up the story within hours. Social media exploded as hashtags like Pine Ridge Scam and HOA Fraud trended across Montana and neighboring states. State legislators immediately announced emergency oversight reforms. The county commissioner warned of potential public corruption charges. The state attorney general launched a statewide investigation into HOA governance, but it was a federal response that truly sent Brenda into a panic. U.S. Marshals executed seizure warrants on every account tied to Pine Ridge Community Services, LLC. Bank accounts locked. Property liens filed. Cryptocurrency wallets confiscated. Every dollar she'd taken was frozen tighter than Fort Knox. The community response was overwhelming. More than 400 residents packed a emergency meeting despite intimidation attempts. Even former allies demanded explanations for the missing funds and forged records. Brenda arrived flanked by a new attorney, a solo criminal defense lawyer from Billings. The shift from civil counsel to criminal defense told everyone exactly how serious a situation had become. Her public unraveling was uncomfortable to witness. Emotional tirades about misunderstandings and bookkeeping errors convinced no one. Increasingly frantic claims that federal agents were targeting her over trivial paperwork issues. It was a visible desperation of someone watching their entire world collapse in real time. When residents demanded to know where the money had gone, Brenda's attorney attempted to invoke Fifth Amendment protections against self-incrimination during an HOA meeting. It was surreal. The final blow came when Dorothy Walsh calmly stepped up to the microphone and read aloud from the original 1987 Pine Ridge Covenant, the documents that established the community as an affordable retirement haven built on transparency and minimal restrictions. 30 years of community trust destroyed by one person's greed and entitlement. Even her husband jumped ship. Court records revealed he'd filed for emergency divorce and was cooperating with federal investigators to avoid prosecution as an accessory. When your own spouse starts applying evidence against you, the game is over. Still, Brenda believed she had one final move. She stood up at the end of the meeting, pointed directly at me with a trembling hand, and shouted, "You people have no idea who you're dealing with. Marcus Payton is a washed-up federal nobody trying to feel important. He has no authority here." The room went completely silent. 400 people holding their breath, waiting for what came next. That's when I stood, reached into my jacket, and pulled out the leather credential case I'd carried for 15 years in Washington, D.C. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The Pine Ridge Community Center had never witnessed anything like it. Every seat was filled, with overflow crowds lining the walls and spilling into the parking lot. County officials occupied the front row. Local media cameras lined the aisles. Brenda sat rigid at the head table beside her criminal defense attorney, clinging to the last scraps of authority as residents fired questions about missing money and forged documents. Her polished confidence was cracking visibly. I waited my turn at the microphone for 20 minutes, reviewing my notes while residents described the financial devastation caused by fabricated violations and illegal assessments. Elena squeezed my hand as Mary Gonzalez finished explaining how she nearly lost her home to Brenda's fraudulent fees. When my name was called, I stepped forward with the same steady confidence I'd carried into federal courtrooms for 15 years. The room fell into that charged silence that signals something irreversible is about to happen. "My name is Marcus Payton," I began, my voice steady and clear. "For the past 3 months, I've been documenting what I believe is a coordinated pattern of embezzlement, fraud, and witness intimidation carried out by our HOA leadership. I presented the evidence piece by piece: fabricated emergency meetings, invalid covenant changes, shell company laundering, vanished community funds. Visual displays showed wire transfers, forged signatures, and bank records forming a clear picture of organized criminal conduct. The audience was transfixed. Phones clicked as residents recorded evidence they were seeing for the first time. County officials scribbled notes. Even the media appeared stunned by the depth, scale, and organization of the fraud. But Brenda wasn't going to surrender quietly. "This is harassment," she snapped, leaping to her feet so suddenly that her chair crashed backward onto the floor. "Character assassination by someone who has no standing in this community." Her voice climbed higher, sharper with every sentence. "Marcus Payton is just a washed-up federal nobody trying to feel important." She sneered, saying he probably couldn't survive real law enforcement anyway. The personal attack hung in the air like gunsmoke after a single loud shot. Several residents gasped. Elena stiffened beside me, ready to rise in my defense. But I only smiled. "You know what, Brenda?" I said calmly, slipping my hand into my jacket pocket with deliberate care. "You're absolutely right about one thing." I paused. I am just a federal nobody. My fingers wrapped around a familiar leather credential case I'd carried for 15 years. The room froze as I opened it with practice ease. The gold badge caught the fluorescent lights overhead, scattering reflections like tiny suns across the crowded room. Special Agent Marcus Payton, Financial Crimes Division, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The silence was crushing. You could have heard a pin drop in the parking lot. Brenda's face drained from furious red to chalk white in a heartbeat. She staggered backward as if struck, clawing for her fallen chair like someone drowning and grasping for air. 15 years investigating wire fraud, mail fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. I continued, my voice steady with the weight of federal authority. And I can honestly say, Brenda, this is one of the most thoroughly documented financial fraud cases I've ever seen. The reaction was instant. Gasps turned into murmurs, then erupted into spontaneous applause that grew into a deafening roar. People stood, clapping, some wiping away tears of relief and validation. Brenda's attorney leaned in, whispering urgently in her ear, likely explaining exactly how catastrophic this had just become now that federal jurisdiction was undeniable. His face was nearly as pale as hers. A federal investigation has been active for 3 weeks, I announced over the applause. Wire fraud and mail fraud charges are being finalized by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Every dollar stolen from this community will be recovered and returned to its rightful owners. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks. Local news crews captured every second of what would dominate Montana headlines by nightfall. National outlets were already calling. An HOA fraud case with a federal agent reveal was irresistible cable news gold. But the most satisfying sight was watching it finally sink in for Brenda. A suburban crime spree was finished. That badge meant federal prison, asset forfeiture, and total financial collapse. Everything she'd stolen to fund her lifestyle would be seized and restored to the very community she'd bullied and exploited. Any questions? I asked. The standing ovation lasted a full 10 minutes. 48 hours later, federal agents arrested Brenda Hartwell as she attempted to board a flight to Costa Rica at Denver International Airport. Seeing her in handcuffs on the evening news was the most satisfying moment I'd had since my daughter's high school graduations. The charges were extensive: wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and witness intimidation. 18 counts carrying a potential sentence exceeding 200 years. Her plea deal reduced that to 4 years in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, and a lifetime ban from holding any HOA leadership role. Asset recovery was swift and complete. The federal government seized her lakefront mansion, dismantled her shell companies, and recovered every cent of stolen funds. $340,000, plus $180,000 in penalties, returned to Pine Ridge within 6 months. The community's transformation was extraordinary. Dorothy Walsh was unanimously elected President Emeritus of a completely restructured HOA board. New bylaws required 75% approval for any fee increases and mandated that all financial records be published online. No more secret meetings. No more hidden accounts. No more room for another Brenda Hartwell. Elena's stress-related health problems, the headaches, the sleepless nights that worried me more than any legal fight, vanished once the threat was gone. Property values rose 12% after the scandal resolved, ironically turning Brenda's crimes into financial gain for the residents she tried to destroy. The scholarship fund was Elena's idea. What should we do with the penalty money? She asked one morning over coffee, watching loons glide across the glass-smooth lake. Something that helps kids, I said without hesitation. The Pine Ridge Student Achievement Fund now provides college scholarships to local high school graduates, funded entirely by Brenda's criminal penalties. 15 students received assistance this year alone. The Environmental Protection Initiative followed naturally. Residents voted overwhelmingly to preserve 200 acres of lakefront as a permanent conservation easement, ensuring no future development could erase the natural beauty that drew us all there. Dorothy's Senior Support Program now provides home maintenance help for elderly neighbors, the kind of real service Brenda's fake fees were supposedly paying for. Real volunteers doing real work, not shell company invoices for services that never existed. The annual Pine Ridge Unity Days Festival celebrates the solidarity forged through hardship. Local bands, food trucks, kids' activities, and a boat parade that draws families from across the county. The opposite of everything Brenda stood for: open, inclusive, transparent, and genuinely community-focused. 6 months later, Montana's Homeowner Protection Act passed unanimously, mandating transparency and accountability for all HOA operations statewide. Our case became the legislative blueprint for protecting homeowners from predatory boards. Media attention was intense but overwhelmingly positive. 60 Minutes featured our story in a national investigation into HOA abuse. Congressional hearings followed. Legal precedents from our case are now cited in fraud prosecutions from Arizona to Florida. But the most meaningful change was personal. My retirement finally arrived, but not as expected. Instead of fishing in novels, I found purpose helping communities fight corruption and abuse of power. Calls poured in after the 60 Minutes segment aired. Communities in Arizona, Colorado, Texas, all facing the same schemes. Elena and I exchanged a look over breakfast as messages stacked up. "You know," she said, refilling my coffee with the same smile that caught my eye 25 years ago, "maybe retirement doesn't mean stopping work. Maybe it means choosing work that actually matters." Now drop a comment with your worst HOA nightmare. Let's help each other spot the warning signs before corruption spirals out of control. And if this story reminded you why accountability matters, hit subscribe for more real stories of ordinary people standing up to broken systems. Because here's what I learned during those intense months fighting for our community. When good people unite around truth and justice, they are unstoppable. Corruption survives in darkness and isolation, but it can't live in transparency and solidarity. Pine Ridge Lake is peaceful again. Loons call across crystal clear water. Children play on shared beaches. Neighbors help neighbors instead of terrorizing them. And sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys really do win. Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where HOA Karens finally meet their match. If this story made you cheer or cringe, like the video, drop your reaction below, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA showdown.